Democrats have got to get better at pushing back and fighting against things that are clearly a lie.
I also just don't understand why we're blaming the Democrats for Republicans lying. What exactly are the Democrats supposed to do?
You keep repeating. They're supposed to fight back.
Yes.
It's always a little awkward when husband and wife get into a public spat, but that's exactly what happened on Morning Joe this morning with Mika Brzezinski and Joe Scarborough. Now Scarborough took his own wife to task for letting weak Democrats off the hook despite their honestly mealy-mouthed fights against Trump and the Republican Party. And honestly, I agree with that sentiment. However, somehow both Mika and Joe came away looking like absolute imbeciles. And I know that's a harsh word to use, but just bear with me as I make my case. So here's the context. The Morning Joe panel was discussing the government shutdown. We are right now, as we speak, undergoing a government shutdown because Congress, the Democrats and the Republicans couldn't come to an agreement on funding the government. And they disagreed in regard to how Democrats should proceed forward, right? So there's a government shutdown. They're also talking about the fact that Republicans have homed in on the talking point that the entire fight is over federally funded healthcare for undocumented immigrants. Now, TYT covered that in detail on yesterday's show. We're not going to get into those details right now, but that's not what this fight is really about. What the Democratic Party really wants to do is essentially repeal a provision from the big, beautiful bill that would cut $1 trillion in Medicaid funds, which obviously would be very devastating for Americans who are reliant on Medicaid. So that's what the whole fight is really about. The Democrats are in the Senate specifically are saying, well, look, we've got some leverage when it comes to funding the government. Why not use this leverage to fight and get something that we want out of these negotiations? Now, Vance Trump and House Speaker Mike Johnson and tons of other Republican leaders have been repeating this claim that federal Medicaid dollars are going to undocumented immigrants. But in reality, that's not really what they're concerned about. They want to continue justifying the massive tax cuts, the permanent tax cuts that disproportionately benefit the rich, while cutting $1 trillion from Medicaid, and they don't want to negotiate with Democrats on this issue at all. Now, Joe Scarborough characterized it as a complete lie, meaning the lie that all these federal dollars are going to undocumented immigrants, and slammed the Democrats for failing to push back on it. Take a look.
Democrats have got to get better at pushing back and fighting against things that are clearly a lie. Whether it's that lie or whether it's JD Vance repeating that lie, whether it's Mike Johnson repeating that lie, whether it's JD Vance saying very matter-of-factly, of course we all know most of the violence politically comes from the left. He knows that's a lie. Where are the Democrats? Why are the Democrats so ineffective in pushing back and fighting back against things that are obviously not true?
Look, so far, I'm on Joe Scarborough's camp. I never thought in a million years that I would say that, but it is true that Democratic voters, I'm personally no longer a Democrat, I'm a registered independent, but I sympathize and had sympathized for many years with Democratic voters who felt that the Democratic Party was essentially inefficient in fighting back against the GOP. They lacked the strategy necessary to push back. And so far, I'm on Joe Scarborough's side. However, Mika Brzezinski didn't take kindly to this criticism of the Democratic Party. Take a look.
I also just don't understand why we're blaming the Democrats for Republicans lying. At the highest level of office, they have the biggest megaphone. They have TV networks that repeat the lies and say things on those networks with no consequence. And the things they say are violent. Okay, so they're not only repeating the lies, but adding to this coarseness. And there's no consequence to it. And we're blaming the Democrats? We're blaming the Democrats for this.
Yes, you should blame the Democrats because the fact of the matter is we now live in an age where partisan media reigns supreme. And there are huge downsides to that, but to pretend as though there's no such thing as liberal media that carries out the messaging of the Democratic Party is laughable to say the least. Yes, there's also conservative media, But for the longest time, I think disproportionately, the media leaned more in the liberal camp as opposed to the conservative camp. Right now, there's partisan media, period. And so there are certainly avenues in which the Democratic Party could use left-wing media to engage or carry out their messaging in a strategic way. And I think that they have failed at that. Part of the reason why they failed at that is because they've been honestly very slow to catch on to the importance of independent media. And what I mean by independent is not ideologically independent. I'm talking about alternative media, right? Digital media, avenues in which you can spread your messaging outside of the ordinary corporate media infrastructure. But on top of that, there really hasn't been much strategy from the Democratic Party to begin with, right? That's really been the core of the issue here. They haven't really figured out what their identity is. I don't know who their leader is. It's kind of been a mess. I think we can all agree on that. And so right now, they're trying to get their bearings, and I actually think they've chosen an important issue to fight on, which is ensuring that you protect Medicaid funds on behalf of Americans who live below the poverty line and need that help in order to ensure they have healthcare coverage. I think that is an important and noble fight to engage in. Now, it's interesting though, because Mika Brzezinski doesn't like the fact that Scarborough and others, myself included, have felt that the Democrats haven't fought hard enough, right? And I'm not just saying fight for the hell of it, right? I'm talking about fight in a strategic way that actually secures policies that benefit the American people. That's what I'm specifically referring to. And so Scarborough steps in, but before you give him too much credit, get a load of who he cites as like the pinnacles of brave Democratic leadership.
What exactly are the Democrats supposed to do?
You keep repeating. They're supposed to fight back.
Yes.
They're supposed to know. They're
and
supposed to do
well?
it.
Like what exactly?
No. Bill Clinton just completely abused and used Republicans in every government shutdown. I know, I was there. He was smart enough politically to do it. Barack Obama knew how to always get the best of Republicans, all right? We're not blaming Democrats for Republicans' lies. We're saying that Democrats at some point have to figure out how to answer those lies. And that's not whining. The whining comes from Democratic leaders that still don't have an answer to Republican lies 10 years into Donald Trump's terms.
Clinton was the president who oversaw and greenlit what was referred to as welfare reform, which was a huge objective of the Republican Party. I don't know, when I think of Bill Clinton, I don't really think of someone who was a real fighter, someone who took the Republican Party to task. But let's put that aside, because there was something else that you might have missed from what Joe Scarborough said there. Because he had said that, well, Barack Obama knew how to always get the best of Republicans. Did he? Did he really? Because if I remember correctly, Obama failed the American people after the 2008 economic collapse to the point where he paved the way for a faux populist like Donald Trump to come into office, to easily win the 2016 election. Now, look, it was a close election, but at the end of the day, someone like Donald Trump was considered a complete no-go. There's no way the American people would vote this guy into office. I didn't see it coming. And he did end up getting voted in 2016, specifically because he ran, in my opinion, now in retrospect, a smart campaign where he spoke to the issues, the financial frustrations and economic concerns that Americans had. Now, obviously, he then came into office and enriched himself and enriched his wealthy donors, just like any other politician who gets elected into the White House would do. So there was that. But to say that Obama was like this brave warrior who aggressively fought back Republicans is insane and laughable to me. So I want to just kind of remind you about a few things. But before I do, just one more video, one more clip. Let's watch.
Get all your smart people around the table, figure out what your strategy is, make it so simple you can put it on a bumper sticker and shove it down your opponent's throats for the next month. Democrats don't know how to do this anymore. Bill Clinton knew how to do it. Barack Obama knew how to do it.
Let's talk about how Barack Obama knew how to do it, okay? So let's take a journey all the way back to 2011, when there was this big debate between Democrats and Republicans on something known as the grand bargain, right? So Obama was definitely the leader of promoting and attempting to push through this so-called grand bargain. The grand bargain was Obama's attempt to compromise, not fight back against, but to compromise with the Republicans. This is during the budget debates in Congress. So the goal was to reduce the national debt, which of course Republicans always pretend like they care about, but once they're in charge, they always add to our national debt. Let's not forget about that. Obama seemed genuine in wanting to do something about the national debt. And so as a result of that, and in the middle of this budget debate and fight in Congress, he was willing to compromise, but compromise, honestly, some of the most important benefits and entitlements for the American people. Social Security is one of them. So basically, again, the goal was to reduce the national debt and avoid automatic spending cuts across the government known as sequestration. So President Barack Obama decided to advocate for historic cuts to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid in exchange for a tax hike, get a load of this, of roughly $100 billion per year over 10 years. So he was willing to cut one of the most important benefits for elderly people in this country, Social Security, in return for, in my opinion, when you think about the numbers we're dealing with today, a measly $100 billion per year in tax increases over a decade. That was a really bad idea. Luckily, it didn't work. So the cuts to Medicare and Medicaid that were proposed by Obama would have totaled $320 billion. And he argued for reducing Social Security benefits by recalculating the way cost of living adjustments are made. They're cuts to Social Security. At the end of the day, I mean, it is a wonder like that Ben Shapiro of all people despised Obama when this is the kind of stuff that Ben Shapiro was totally in favor of. But let me continue. He also proposed some deductions, tax deductions for big business. Does that sound like fighting back against the Republicans? No, not to me, not at all. One of the main figures leading the charge against the grand bargain was none other than Senator Bernie Sanders, because he's always been consistent in wanting to fight back on behalf of ordinary working class Americans. So you gotta love him for that. On the other side though, the Tea Party fought the deal because they didn't feel that there were enough cuts to these programs that Americans pay into. And because of that pressure, Republican House Speaker at the time, that was John Boehner, rejected the deal. So John Boehner, who then, by the way, retired from politics and proceeded to work in the cannabis industry, he ended up saving us, even though I don't agree with his politics at all. And so luckily the grand bargain didn't work, and Obama, the guy who wanted to hand Republicans historic cuts to Social Security and Medicaid, according to Joe Scarborough, knew how to always get the best of Republicans? Is he high? But then I remember that Joe Scarborough is a former Republican who very likely falls in the camp of neoliberalism and hates these entitlement programs which Americans pay into and are entitled to. But look, the terrible takes from the Morning Joe panel didn't end there, because panelist Mike Barnicle came in and he actually agreed with Joe Scarborough that the Democrats need to do a better job of fighting hard. And he has someone in mind to take up that mantle.
It's who's delivering the punch 'em out message. Hakeem Jeffries is a wonderful guy. Chuck Schumer's a nice guy. They're not getting it done. I saw a guy over the weekend who is getting it done, who knows how to get it done in a form of the future of the Democratic Party, basically saying what's wrong with the Democrats. And this guy stood up. His name is Rahm Emanuel, and he had everyone who was listening to him on the edge of their chair saying, yeah.
Yeah, Rahm knows how to do this.
Yeah, well, there's one. Good, good.
If you're wondering how out of touch are the liberals on MSNBC, let me give you a little taste. Let's take a look at this next graphic, which shows that, oh wow, Rahm Emanuel's popularity rating is a whopping 19%. He was a disaster in the Obama administration, first term of course, where he called progressives effing R-word. And he was disastrous as the mayor of Chicago. That's the guy that you're going to put on a pedestal as a guy who could really get it done for the Democrats? Man, talk about not understanding the moment we're in at all. So there are no winners in this story, unfortunately. It is what it is.